Hey everyone, Dan here with Hardly Brief Tutorials. In this video, we're going to take another look at the Unity input system and some more advanced controls and interactions that system allows us to use in our projects. If you haven't watched my first video on the Unity input system, I would highly recommend checking it out, and I'll go ahead and link it in the video now. It does go over installing the package from the package manager, setting it up for the first time in a new project, as well as kind of creating some basic controls and showing some use cases what you can do with the Unity input system. But in this video, we're going to go over different types of interactions and how to combine them onto one input action. So for example, I'm going to show you how to create a fire weapon action that will actually allow you to tap or slow tap the same button, in this case the trigger, and then distinguish between those two actions so you can do different things with them in your code. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. Make sure to click the notification icon to get reminded when I release a new video. It really does help out the channel a lot. And if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below. But let's go ahead and get started. One more thing, I set up a new Discord server for the community. I created two major sections on the server. One is for Hardly Brief Tutorials, where you can ask me questions, you can ask other people questions, get some help on whatever you're working on. You can chat with other game developers, and you can even suggest tutorial ideas. So if there's something that you want me to work on, something you want me to show you how to do, add it there and we can start working on it. Also, I added a channel where I'm going to be posting the scripts from the videos that I create on the channel. So if you become a member of the Discord, you'll be able to download those scripts. The other major section is a personal devlog of mine for a tennis game I've been working on. So be sure to check that out, follow along. I do post frequent updates on that, and I take suggestions as well. I have also created a Trello board for everyone to follow along to check out and see when videos are going to be uploaded to YouTube. You can see what I'm working on. You can see what's going to be released next. And then all the suggestions I get from the Discord or from Twitter or from the YouTube comments, I'm going to put in the backlog on that Trello board. And then maybe we could do some voting or something to show you, to figure out what exactly everyone wants me to work on and show you how to do. So if that all sounds interesting, again, please join us on the Discord. I'll put the link in the description below. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first part of this video, we're going to cover the fire action. So the fire action is going to have a tap ability where I tap the trigger or tap the left mouse button and it's going to fire a bullet, let's say, or if I hold it down, it's going to charge for a while and then something's going to happen. So I haven't implemented the actual gun firing mechanic, so you're not going to see anything super flashy on the screen, but the game logic is there and it's up to you to kind of apply it for your project. So basically here I have a game scene, I have a player, and the player has several scripts attached to it, but the two important ones are player controls and player interactions controller. These two are for this project. The other thing is a player movement controller, which I cover in the rigid body tutorial series, which I'll link now. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to click my left mouse button and then show you that it's on the controller as well. If I click my left mouse button, you can see down the console that I'm doing a normal fire. And what that is, this would be your basic shot, right? This is a tap interaction for the fire action that is in the input controller, or the input actions asset, excuse me. Now, if I use the controller and I click my right, or if I tap my right trigger, it's also doing the same normal fire. And if I hold it down, you can see this charge meter that comes up on the screen. And down on the console, you can see it's a different type of thing. It's not a normal fire, it's a charged fire. And then there's a value to the right of it, which ends up being a timer, an elapsed milliseconds timer, or value that I set through a timer just to get that a value, right? We want to assign a value to what we just charged to. In this case, I'm using a stopwatch. You can use whatever you want. But that value can be applied to, let's say, like a modifier for the amount of damage that you do. So if you hold it down for the max amount of time, that modifier is going to be a lot larger, and you can multiply that or add it to whatever damage this attack might do. So that's that, and it works again with the controller and the mouse. So now that I kind of demoed it, let's go into the asset, which I've called game controls, right? And it has an action map called player controls, and we can look at the actual action. So here it is, it's called fire. It is bound to the left button and then the right trigger, and it has two interactions on it. And this is like the bulk, this is the meat of the input system, and what makes it great and pretty easy to get up and going. So you have multiple events that are happening off of one button. So in this case, we have a tap interaction and a slow tap interaction. The tap is the normal fire, right? That's just me quickly tapping the controller or the mouse. And I'm going to turn the controller off now. And then slow tap is another method that happens if the tap fails and we reach this minimum tap duration, meaning we're holding down the trigger for a minimum of 0.2 seconds. Then the slow tap is what's going to begin and what's going to be called once we let go of the trigger or the mouse button. And to add interactions is pretty simple. You just go to the plus icon here on the right and you can add the different type of interactions. In this video, we're going to take a look at tap, slow tap, multi-tap, and then hold. But right now we're just going to check out tap and slow tap. So again, fire is my action. It's bound to the left button and the right trigger. I have two interactions on here, tap and slow tap. The min tap duration for slow tap is how long you have to hold it in order for Unity to register that is a slow tap. But let's go into the code and we'll take a look at what I wrote to make this all work. So the first thing we're going to do is look at my player control script, and I'm going to open that up. And one thing to note that's really important to get this to work is you need to make sure that you're using the Unity input system .interactions. Otherwise, the if statements that I use later or show later are not going to work properly. But here I have a player controls. It inherits mono behavior. The eye movement controls interface here is used for the movement system that I did with the rigid body, which is the previous tutorial, and I'll link that now if you want to check that out. But to get the fire example to work, you need to have 3 events. So I have 3 events here. One is called fire performed. The second is called fire held started. And lastly, we have fire held performed. And these 3 events are going to fire based on whatever input you're doing on the controller. So fire performed will be called if you just tap the controller. Fire held started would be called if you're holding down the trigger. And then fire held performed will be held when you release the trigger, as long as you've reached that min tap duration. So these are the 3 events that are important. I'll go over the rest of these later in the video. So just remember these 3 events for now. We have a private reference to our game controls, which is the input actions asset that we create with the Unity input system. And then I create a new version of that, or a new reference of that, object of that, in the awake method. And then I call a method called setup. And in setup is where I actually set up how we're going to call those events that I just talked about. So for fire control specifically, we access our game controls reference. Then we're going to look for our player controls action map, input map, and then we're going to look for the fire action, and we're looking to see for the started action that's called on that. So when I first start holding the trigger, when I first press it, this event is going to go off, and we're going to run this bit of code. And what it's going to do, it's going to look at this context, and it's going to look for its interaction, and it's going to say if the interaction that we're doing, so if we're holding the trigger, we're pressing down the left mouse button, and it's a slow tap interaction, then we're going to say fire held start event, and we're going to invoke it. So we're going to make sure that there's a listener. First off, if someone is listening for this event, then we're going to go ahead and fire it off, and then we can start the meter, that blue meter that was going, right? So this if statement is just checking to see if it's a slow tap interaction or not. And when it started. So when we release the button, so let's say we've held it for like a second and we release it, then we're going to do the same thing we did up here, but instead of started, we're going to look for performed. We're going to check to see if the interaction is a slow tap interaction. If it is a slow tap interaction, then we're going to call the fire held performed event, and whatever's listening to it then can perform whatever action we want. Otherwise, meaning we just tapped it really fast, we're going to fire the fire performed event and not the held one. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have a question, leave it down in the comments below. I'm going to show you how to use these events in a different script. So again, on my player, I have a class called Player Interactions Controller. It is of mono behavior, so it's a component that's attached to my player. And I kind of built this script to show all the interactions. So you might not need all this in your game, but it just shows how the game logic kind of works. So here I have, again, Player Interactions Controller, and I get a reference to the Player Controls class, and it's a serialized field, so this is exposed in the editor, in the inspector, so you can drag and drop the Player Controls, which is this class I just went over. So here we have a private reference to that. And what we need to do is I wrote a method called subscribe, which is called when this object is enabled. So when the player is enabled, it's turned on, it's going to go ahead and subscribe to these events, and it's going to go to player controls.fire held started. It's going to look for those three I just listed. So fire held started, fire performed, and fire held performed. And I wrote different methods for each of these things. So for fire held started, I have an on fire held started method. For fire performed, I have on fire. And then for fire held performed, I have an on charge fire. And these three events are where you are going to program all your game logic. So let me scroll down to those and show you how they work. So on fire held started, that means I'm holding the trigger in. I'm holding down the left mouse button. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create an instance of a stopwatch. This is a C# stopwatch, like a .NET stopwatch that allows us to keep track of time. I'm going to start it, and then I'm going to make sure that I'm not running any coroutine. And then we're going to set is charging to true, meaning we're holding down the charge. And then I'm going to start a coroutine called charge fire meter. And this coroutine is used just for the UI element to show that that blue ring is moving. So let's go down to that. So here I have the private IE enumerator charge fire meter. This is a coroutine where I set the fill amount to my image of 0. And then I have a charge meter. Or I set the film out to 0 so you can't see it, and then I turn it on. I turn the game object on. We wait just a hair. We wait just a little bit. So there's a little delay. It feels kind of gamey, but it feels good. So this is something that you can experiment with and see if you want it in your projects. And then we enter a while loop. So this while loop is true, or stays going as long as we're holding down the button. So it is charging. While we're charging, we're going to use our stopwatch and check the elapsed milliseconds and divide it by the full charge time. So the full charge time is how long I want to hold the trigger for. Basically, this is a random number. I set it to 650, I think. Let me scroll up to the top real fast. Yeah, so it's set to 650. And basically, I'm just said, when you reach 650 milliseconds, no matter how much longer you hold it, you've reached 100% charge. That variable is up to you and really depends on the project you're working on. I just set it to a variable. I thought 650 made sense. Doesn't really matter. It's very arbitrary. But once is charging is set to false, meaning we've released the trigger, we're going to wait again. So we're going to let it sit for just a moment on the screen so you can kind of see it, realize that you got maybe halfway, fully charged, whatever. And then we're going to turn it off, and then we're going to exit out of this coroutine. So now I'm scrolling back up to on fire held. So we start that coroutine, and then once we release it, we're going to be down in the on charge fire. So we've held it for 0.2 seconds at least to trigger a slow tap interaction. Now we've let go of it. We're going to immediately stop our timer. We're going to set is charging to false, which is going to allow us to exit that coroutine. We're going to capture how long we charged for, and we're going to output that to the console. So this says charge fire and then the amount we charged. So that number you saw in Unity just says this is how long you charged for in milliseconds. So that's the held fire. The normal fire, the quick one where you're just tapping the button is pretty simple. It's just right here. I'm just saying normal fire says, hey, you just did something. Making sure is charging is false, and making sure that if I do have a coroutine that's running, that we're just going to stop it. This is just to make sure nothing crazy is going on. But here is where you'd put your logic for like a basic spell, basic gunshot, whatever it is. And then on charge fire is where you're going to put your information for a charge shot, a massive spell, whatever it is that you want to charge up to. This is where you'd put that game logic. And then on fire held start is really just where you do UI elements. So that is the basics of tap and slow tap. The next thing we're going to look at is the interaction button, which is going to be a hold and a tap. So now we're going to take a look at the tap and the hold interactions. So I'm going to start my game back up. I'm going to turn the controller on so you can see what I'm doing. And if I hold the B button, you see this white ring that pops up on the screen. And if I let go, it cancels and it resets every time I press it. So if I hold it, it turns green. And you can see down in the console here, it says I did a held interaction, and was it successful? It was is true, right? So that's when it turns green, is we know it's successful. If I let go of it though, it's not successful. And then if I tap, you can see in the console here, I do a normal interaction. So I have the same hierarchy set up where it does a tap and then a hold. So again, I hold it, turns green, we held the interaction. If I tap it, it does a normal interaction. So let's go into the game controls asset again. I'm gonna double click, open it up, and show you how I have that set up. So again, my player action map is called player controls. Under actions, I have one called interact. And you can see I have it tied to the F on my keyboard and then the button east or the B button on the Xbox controller. These have no processors or interactions on it, but it does have two interactions. So the first interaction is a hold, and it has a hold time and a press point, and then tap. And this again has a max tap duration and then a press point. So while we're here, let's go ahead and talk about these values. The press point, if you hover over it, see if I can get it to do it. It should explain, sometimes it does. It explains basically what this is. I'm not sure why it's not showing up for me now, but basically there's a whole bunch of defaults you can set, which tells it here. But the press point is how far the button's actuated before Unity recognizes it as a valid hold. In this case, it's 0.5. If it's a keyboard or a button, it's going to be 0, 1. So this doesn't really matter. You can kind of leave it on the default. Hold time is how long you want it to hold before the action is successful. So in my case, I have it set to 0.75, so 3/4 of a second. I'm going to hold it for that long. If I hold it that long, then we know that the hold interaction for the interact action is true. It's successful, which is on the screen, I turn green, right? So that's how that works. So if the hold fails and it does a tap, then we have a tap interaction. If the hold completes, then it's going to call this hold interaction and we can do something with it. So let's go and look at the code and see what we can do with it. I'm going to exit out of this and go back to our player. Again, I have that player control script attached to it. Double click, open it up, and we can see what we've done. So again, I'm in that player controls class, and under the fire stuff, I have interact. And it's the same setup. I have an interact perform event. I have an held interact started event. It has a float value that you can send. I don't actually think I used that though. I have a held interact performed and then held interaction canceled. So basically, we want to know when we canceled it so we can turn off the UI. We want to know when we started it so we can turn on the UI. And then we want to know if it's successful or not. And we can pass in, turn the UI green. So those are the 4 events I have. If we scroll down, we can see how I do it. So basically, if it started, right? So we have our game controls, our action map called player controls. The action's called interact. Once we start, we're doing the same thing. Is the interaction, is it a hold interaction? If it's true, then we want to go ahead and pass in the held interact started. We're going to fire the event and we're going to pass in the duration. So this is the 0.75. This is going to allow us to say that this hold interaction has a time limit, a minimum time for it to be successful of the duration, which in this case is 0.75. That's what this does here. And this is a cast. So I'm casting this interaction as a hold interaction, and I'm passing the duration. So this is what we use to start the that white UI element. Now in performed, we're going to be doing the same thing. We're going to look, was this interaction a hold interaction? If it was, here I just grab the interaction. I don't actually do anything with this, so we can comment it out. But basically, I'm going to invoke the held interaction performed event here. If it wasn't performed, if I just tapped the B button, if I just tap my F button for the interact, then it's going to invoke the interact perform. So this would be like your normal fire, very similar to that. And then lastly, I'm looking at the canceled event. So if this whole thing was canceled, meaning I let go of the interact button, then I'm saying cancel. I'm telling it to turn off the UI is what I use as event for the held interaction canceled. You can do this same if statement. So if you want to make sure that it's the hold event, you can absolutely do something like this, and it will work just as fine. So basically, this makes it a little bit more verbose. You're saying, hey, I only care if the hold interaction was canceled. If that's true, then go ahead and fire the hold interact canceled event. That makes a little bit more sense with how I label the events. And again, these scripts will be available to download in the Discord. You got to be a member though, and then I post all the scripts there for you to download. You can take a look at it. Okay, so those are the events. Those are how they get fired. Let's go see how I use them. So I'm going to go back to my player interactions controller script where we did all the fire UI, and I did the same thing with all the events for the held interaction stuff. So here in the subscribe, I'm adding a bunch of my 4 methods as listeners, right? So I'm saying if the held interact started event goes off, then we want to fire the on interact held started method. Same thing with performed. Whether it's a hold, like we held it or we just tapped it. These are these 2 different methods. And then if it's canceled, we want to go ahead and make sure we call the on canceled method. So I'm going to scroll down and we can take a look at those. So on interact, so I just tap the B button, right? We're just going to say, hey, this was a normal interaction. Maybe you want to, I'm trying to think, maybe you tap really quick to talk to somebody. You don't need to hold down the button. This is what could initiate that, right? So you could cast a ray out or cast some sort of collider out to see if you interact with the NPC. That's where this game logic would be on the on interact. But let's say you want to open a chest that requires you to hold something longer. Here you can do it with this method. So this is on interact held started. And what we're going to do is we're going to reset the held image, which is the white UI image that pops up. We're going to turn it off. If we're running a coroutine, which I'll jump into in a moment, we're going to make sure we stop it. We're going to set is interacting to true, and then was held successful as false, right? We're just kind of resetting everything for a new hold. And then we're going to go ahead and start the interact hold timer, which is a coroutine I wrote below. Which is very, very similar to the charge fire meter and has basically the same concepts. I wrote it a little differently just with 2 booleans, which probably wasn't necessary. I think this is a little over-engineered here. But the same, it works. It's the same concept. Basically, I set a float % to 0. The current time is equal to 0. And then we set our fill amount of our image, and then we turn on our image here. And then while we're interacting, so while I'm holding down the button, interacting is true, we are going to have our fill amount. We're going to set our fill amount of our image equal to the fill %. We're going to calculate the fill % based on the current time and then that whole duration. So if you remember, the event that fires when we start, we pass in the duration, how long we need to hold it. That's what this whole duration is, right? So this ends up being 0.75. Our current time is the time.delta time, which is like the time since the last frame. So this ends up working out really well for this calculation. Then we wait for the end of frame, and we just keep doing this. So that's why you see that meter slowly filling up based on the hold percentage, their hold duration, of 0.75. Once this is done, so once we let go, once it's complete and it's done, and we let go of it, then the was successful is going to fire. It's going to tell us whether or not it's true or false. If it was true, meaning we've held the entire time, we're going to set our image color to green. We're going to make sure that the fill amount is set to 1. And this is just to make sure that it is 1, because it could be 0.999, right? It could be a very, very small number. We want to make sure, or it could be over 1. So we just want to make it say, hey, it's 1, it was successful. So make it fully filled. We're going to allow this to be on screen for 0.5 seconds. This is not necessary, but this just makes it feel a little bit more gamey. And then we're going to go ahead and reset it and turn it off and set was successful equals false. So this just resets the image, turns it off, resets it. Pretty simple stuff right here. So here I set the color back to white, this fill amount back to 0, and then we turn off the game object. That's the reset held image method. So again, let me run through this. On the on interact held started, we're going to go ahead and start that coroutine. We're going to reset our variables, start the coroutine. Once we let go of it, it's been performed, meaning it was successful. Then we know was successful, held was true. We're no longer interacting with it, and we can go ahead and perform game logic here. So you could walk up to a chest. The chest could have a collider on it, and it allows you to do a hold interaction. And then once the hold interaction is true, that could launch some event that opens the chest, and you can get whatever items are in it, that sort of thing. And then the last thing is here, if it's canceled, so you're holding it down halfway, then you let go of it. We want to go ahead and reset everything. So we're going to set is interacting to false. We were not successful, so we're going to go ahead and reset our fill image, and we're going to make sure that we're stopping that interact timer routine, coroutine here. So those are the bulk of that. hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below, or you can get on our Discord channel. You can ask me there or anybody else that's on there. Again, these scripts will be available on that Discord channel if you want to go there and download them. So in the next video, I'm going to cover some more in the next video. We're going to cover some more movement stuff. We're going to check out a multi-tap as well to make a dash. And I'll answer whatever questions you guys have. But hopefully that explained how the Unity system works, a little bit more advanced on how the Unity input system works. And if you have any requests, anything you want me to cover in the next video, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below, and I'll make sure to do that. Otherwise, you guys have a good day, and I'll see you next time.